Okay, well, welcome everybody. It is great to see everyone, and we want to welcome you to tonight's edition of The Great Movies with special guest Raquel Stecher. But before we get started with that, my name is Andy Wolverton, and I would like to thank Darnice Jasper, my co-host and partner in crime, for being here with me tonight as always. Darnice and I are both librarians with the Anne Arundel County, Maryland Public Library System, which sponsors this program. And a special welcome to anyone joining us tonight for the first time. We're so glad to have you. If you're new to the group and would like to be on our email list, please send me an email at awolverton@aacpl.net. That will keep you up to date on all the latest news for all of our movie events. And please know that we want to have as many people participating as possible tonight. So if you have a question or a comment, you can raise your real hand or your virtual hand, or you can use the chat feature and Darnice will work you into the conversation. We also ask that you please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Okay, so many of you will remember that tonight's guest joined us previously to talk about books on movies and gave us many fantastic reading suggestions and briefly talked about her annual Summer Classic Movie Reading Challenge. Well, tonight, since summer is right around the corner and certainly feels like it's here right now, she's going to be talking in depth about her summer reading challenge and how you can join, or maybe you just want to find out some great movie book titles to read on your own this summer. So no matter how you want to work that out, we're glad you're here and we're going to give you some great titles. So please join me in welcoming back Raquel Stecher. Welcome, Raquel.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Thanks for being back. This has just been a real treat. You know, so many people last time, I mean, I got emails the last time you were on the program, like 10 minutes after the program was over saying, when are you going to have Raquel back again? So,
Oh, I love to hear that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you got a big fan base here, so that's wonderful.
Thank you.
So we really want to hear a lot about your Summer Classic Movie Book Reading Challenge, which actually kicked off today, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I timed it for today since I knew I was going to be here. So.
Wow, we're so honored. We're not worried. So we're anxious to hear about, especially any of the new books that have come out since the last time you were with us. But I thought it would be fun if you told us for just a couple of minutes how the book challenge got started.
So it started in 2013, which means this is the 9th iteration of this. I counted it. So this is the ninth challenge. And so in 2013, I had met up with a friend and she was telling me, oh, Raquel, I have all of these classic movie books, but no time to read them. They're just collecting dust on my shelves. And I said to myself, no, you have time to read them. You have to just make time to read them. So at the time in the book blogging world, there were a lot of people who were hosting these really fun challenges. They would maybe challenge people just to read a particular subgenre or a particular topic. And it was very specific. I mean, there was like a dead author challenge and there was like a continent challenge. So I thought, why don't I do a classic movie book challenge? And so I encourage people to read up to 6 books. 6 books is the goal, but you can read anywhere like from 1 to 6, that's fine. And it takes place over the summer. And you can read pretty much what you want. So it's not like a book club where a book is assigned. You can pick 6 books of your choosing. And so the way it works is that you come to my site and there's a sign up form. So you sign up and you read a classic movie book, and then you write a review and you post it online in some public platform. And that's the accountability feature. That's how you can prove that you actually read the book and participated in the challenge. And I encourage people to they could write a review on their blog. They can do maybe like a Twitter thread review. They can do a really fun review on Instagram. I have a friend, Robbie, who does, he's out in Burbank, California. He does really amazing book reviews, and he poses the books at the Warner Brothers lot, which is really fun. Some people have done podcast reviews, YouTube reviews. You can review on Goodreads or Library Thing, as long as it's public, and you can get a link to share, then it counts. I have a hashtag classic film reading that you can use online. Then once you've reviewed a book, you can go to the form to submit it, and you just rinse and repeat until you get to your 6 books. And if you do read all 6, you are automatically entered to into my giveaway, where I pick usually 3 to 4 people to win. And the prize is this year it's a Kino Lorber DVD or Blu-ray of your choosing.
Oh, wow.
So, and I'm not sponsored. I out of, I just buy the movies and send them along, and it's open internationally. So the whole point of this was to really just get people who love classic movies and have all these books or have access to all of these books, because there's a lot of books either that people own or they're available at their local libraries that they want to read but haven't gotten to. So this was a really great way of challenging people to read that over the summer. And there's a lot of flexibility with it, so people really like it, and it's been really fun to host every year. And I have do you want me to explain like what the criteria are?
Yeah, sure.
So, and I'll give a just quickly a rundown and a couple examples of what counts. So I have it grouped into 6 different categories. The first one is a biographical book. So it could be a biography, autobiography, a memoir. It could be a collection of interviews, letters, all of that counts. It could be the cutoff I have is 1970s, but I'm a little flexible with that. You can always reach out and ask if something qualifies. And it could be a book about an actor, actress, director. Like one book I'm going to talk about today that I just recently read is Cecily Tyson's memoir, so that would count for that category. And then the second category is books about films. It could be about a genre of films. Like I have an example here, which is this massive book about silent movies, which I believe you guys have in your system. Silent Movies: The Birth of Film and Triumph of Movie Culture. Has a foreword by Martin Scorsese. This is really beautiful. Or it could be a book about a single movie, like this one. This is a book about the Pride of the Yankees, and by Richard Sandomir. This is just really in depth. You get pretty much every little bit of information you'd ever want to know about this movie and about Lou Gehrig and Gary Cooper. So that's super interesting. So, and also like genre books, Andy has a really great video on his YouTube channel all about film noir books. So if you want recommendations about that. So it could be about any type of genre, time period, the world's your oyster. And so the third category is coffee table books. And I like to do this, especially like one year I read a 1,000-page biography about Barbara Stanwyck. I was like, I need a palate cleanser after that long of a book. So I recommend people read coffee table books. And I have a honker here. You guys have this in your system too. Cecil B Demille. This is the book. This is by Mark A. Vieira, and it's also co-written by Cecilia DeMille Presley. And this is a gorgeous coffee table book. And sometimes they're very heavy with text, and sometimes they're light with text, but it doesn't matter as long as it's about the classic film era. It can count. And this is great if you're if you want to explore maybe production design or style, fashion, or there are photography books about a particular actor or actress. So there's lots of great things. And it's, as I said, it's like a great way to mix up the books, especially if you have longer texts and you want to maybe read something that takes less time. And then the next category is film criticism or analysis. So it could, this is a little heavier. This is, going into like the scholarly aspect of classic film, like books basically. So so if you're intimidated by this, there are like, you can skip this category. You don't have to read from every category. You could choose what you want. But I do recommend something that would count as The Devil Finds Work by James Baldwin. This is really a fascinating collection of essays about his experience as a Black man watching movies growing up and into his adulthood. And this is really just amazing. So I highly recommend this, and this would count for that category. And then the fifth category is a 20th century novel that was adapted into a classic movie. And something that would count for this is like The Postman Always Rings Twice by James M. Cain. This is really fun to do because you can always compare the book and the movie. And this book is super interesting to compare with the movie because they're very different. So this is really fun, and it counts for the challenge. And it's a great way to mix up fiction with your nonfiction, because nonfiction can, sometimes get overwhelming, especially when it's a lot of information. And then the last category is a novel fictionalizing a classic film, or an actress or an actor from Hollywood. There are books about the silent movie era. There are books about, the 30s. There are fictionalized books about Marilyn Monroe or Jean Harlow and Marlene Dietrich. So there's a lot of options there. So any of those six categories can count, but you can read all biographies, all coffee table books. You can read whatever you want.
Great. Yeah, Raquel, that's a lot of different types of books, which is great to have that variety. Like you said, I love what you said about the coffee table book, because, if you read that 1,000-page Barbara Stanwyck biography, which is only half of her career.
Oh, yes. Yes.
You want something else going to go by a little quicker than that. Although that's from what I've read, that's a great book. So most of the people that participate in the Summer Reading Challenge, what are some of the more popular types of books that they do? Or is it usually biographies of movie stars or other things?
So I think the most popular category definitely is biographies. A lot of people read memoirs. Gloria Swanson's memoir is really popular. Last year, I think the one that was most reviewed was this one, which is Olivia de Havilland's memoir, Every Frenchman Has One. That was reviewed a few times. So that's the most popular. A lot of people read genre books. I know you read a lot about film noir and review about that, and a lot of people have their particular decades they're interested in. Maybe somebody will only read books about the 1930s or 40s. People will read about World War II movies. There's lots of different options. I'm surprised how many people actually read film criticism and some really heavy scholarly text about very obscure subjects, like some maybe like not a very well-known filmmaker from Europe who maybe I've never heard of, and it's a scholarly text about them. And I read all of the reviews. I comment on as many as I can, and I share them. And it's really interesting what people will dive into. But the one that's probably the least popular is the novel that's fictionalizing classic movies, but I do get a few of those. But most of the people focus on biographies and genre books.
Okay. So Raquel, let's say that I'm reading The Making of Singing in the Rain, and I'm really into it, and I'm about halfway through it, and then I look on your blog and I see that somebody's already reviewed that book. Mm-hmm. What do I do?
Oh yeah, no, I've had people, like, for example, I think maybe 2 or 3 people reviewed this book last summer. I encourage that. I'd like to see that. I like to see different perspectives, because not everyone will have the same reaction to a book. And also people might review a different way. Somebody might review it on their Instagram. Somebody might write a very long piece on their blog. So I highly encourage it. You don't have to pitch for a particular book to review. You can just review what you want. And if other people are reviewing it, that's totally fine. Okay,
great. Well, in all the years that you've done this, and I know you've run across so many books just from people reviewing them for your blog, for the challenge. can you let us know about a couple of books that were surprises to you that like people were even interested in reading or people even knew about, or maybe a book that you didn't even know about?
Well, I mean, as I said before, the scholarly books on really obscure filmmakers, those are always a surprise. And I love to see those. I mean, some people have read very scholarly books on different topics about like maybe race in the movies or an exploration of, a filmmaker's work like with a feminist angle. Like there's lots of interesting ones. I actually discovered this book, Considering Doris Day, by Tom Santo Pietro, through the challenge. And almost everybody gives this a terrible review. And I just got it because I want to know why it's so bad. I haven't read it yet, but this was probably the biggest surprise is how many people hate this book. And I don't know if it's because they I mean, I think the concern is how she's portrayed in the book. So I wonder if there's like a little bit of concern that she's not portrayed in the best light, or that maybe the sources aren't very good. So that one is probably the biggest surprise. But yeah, it runs the gamut. Just for figures, last year I had 39 participants and they reviewed 80 books, including myself. So not everyone completes the challenge, and some people don't even read a single book. They have the best intentions but don't quite get there, which is totally fine. But a lot of people do, so it really runs the gamut.
Great. Well, I know some people are going to have some questions later on, but can you tell us maybe about some of the books that you've discovered since the last time we talked that people might want to choose for their summer reading?
So I wanted to talk today about 2 books I recently read, 2 books I'm reading now, and then 2 books I plan to read. So I thought that would be kind of fun. So I mentioned this one earlier, but this one I just finished recently. Just As I Am is a memoir by Cecily Tyson. I hope you guys could see it. It's co-written by Michelle Burford. So a lot of the language in the book is it's very well written, and you can tell that it's Cicely Tyson's voice comes through very well in the book, but she's also guided by this very capable writer who adds really beautiful language to the book. And this is an amazing memoir. Like the amount of detail that Cicely Tyson remembers from her childhood is quite astonishing. I couldn't remember half of what she remembers from her childhood. So there's lots of really amazing details. So she talks about, her family growing up in Harlem. She reveals that she had a child when she was a teenager, and she protects the her daughter's privacy. So she doesn't name her. She gives her a fake name, Joan. I thought that was interesting. She talks about becoming a model and then becoming an actress. And this book I think it was finished right around the holidays of last year. And Cicely Tyson passed away maybe like 3 days after the book was published in January. So this book even has her thoughts on the pandemic, which I think is really interesting. And considering this is almost like her final performance in a way, because she finished it just before she passed away. And this just gives us all sorts of information about her life and her career, but it really focuses on the personal relationships she's had, her marriage to Miles Davis, her friendship with Arthur Mitchell, the dancer. There's lots of great stories about Maya Angelou, Ruby Dee, Sidney Poitier, her thoughts on the civil rights movement, her thoughts on what's going on today, and then the pandemic, even her diet. She talks about drinking celery juice every day and becoming a vegetarian. So I don't know, I had so much fun reading this, and lots of is a really great admiration for her, especially because she broke some really like strict beauty standards by wearing her hair natural and being an actress in refusing certain roles because she really wanted roles that that she could really sink her teeth in. She didn't want to play what she calls domestics and stuff like that. So it's really you get the gamut. So I really highly recommend this memoir. And then another memoir I read recently, and I'm going to do something a little different right now because I don't actually have the book in front of me. So bear with me one moment.
Okay, we like experimentation on this.
Nice.
So I actually read this book, Blowing the Bloody Doors Off, by Michael Caine on Overdrive. It is available on audio. And Michael Caine, his absolutely iconic voice, his Cockney accent that is just like become a signature of his, coming through, and him telling you stories is just a fantastic experience. So this one is actually really interesting. It's part memoir, but also part like advice. Like he offers advice to the reader. It's almost like a self-help book / memoir. So he tells you lots of stories about his, difficult childhood, growing up during World War II, how he became an actor. And he tells you a lot of stories about different films he made, like the early films, like him being an Alfie, The Italian Job, Get Carter, and then some more recent films too. He kind of like runs the gamut. He talks a little bit about personal relationships, his relationship with his wife, and his friendships with people like Sean Connery and Jack Nicholson. So lots of great stories there, but also it almost feels like Michael Caine is you're like your wingman, like he's championing you. Like, hey, he tells you, don't hesitate, don't be afraid, do what makes you happy. He talks about being prepared, treating life like you're always in an audition, because you never know what opportunities will show up in the future. He talks about being on time and being prepared and not being temperamental and supporting the next generation of actors in his case, but in our case, who's following in our footsteps. And he's quite humble in this book and charming, and I just felt like a better person for reading it. It's quite amazing. I highly recommend on Overdrive listening to the audiobook, just hearing him tell you stories. And he's got a lot of really, really fun stories. So yeah, highly recommend it. You'll feel like you're ready to conquer the world after reading this book.
I think a lot of us could use that feeling.
Definitely.
Now, a book I'm reading now, which is the polar opposite of this one, is Christopher Plummer's memoir. He passed away in February, so this is kind of a gift too, because this was published a few years ago, but it's nice to hear from him, and hear his stories. And he's also got that really beautiful voice. He's also incredibly like talented in delivering. He's got the delivery, but he's also very well spoken, and he's I don't know, there's like some poetry to his words. I love his Oscar acceptance speech. Is one of my favorites. And I've actually heard him speak in person. He's just a really great orator. Like he grew up training on the stage. There's a lot of information. He's the opposite of Michael Caine in terms of like, he didn't grow up poor. He grew up in a very wealthy family in Montreal. So there's lots of really great stories about his work in Quebec and in Ontario. And he sings in French. He's bilingual. So there's lots of like really great moments where he's speaking French a little bit. And he has this is one of the spiciest memoirs I've ever read. There are some crazy stories. Like, I would go on a walk with my dog and listen to this on my headphones and just burst out laughing at different points. I'm sure people thought I was crazy, but he also shares a lot of stories about people we know and love, like Laurence Olivier, John Barrymore. He's got amazing stories about Ruth Chatterton Edward Everett Horton. He called Zachary Scott more fun than a picnic. And I mean, he was like, he was working with these people, and he was also like drinking and like cavorting with them. So there's all sorts of fun stories. This is not safe for work though. There are some really spicy stories in this. But you get a lot of really great information about his work in the theater, because he started working in the theater as a teenager, and then it talks about, becoming a Hollywood star. And I haven't got to the Sound of Music part yet, so I'm working my way there. But yeah, it's incredibly entertaining. His voice is amazing, and it's not humble. It's not humble like Michael Caine's, but it's so much fun. And he's just really amazing. He's so talented. He was so talented. So somebody we lost this year, but we have this gift.
We also have that book, didn't mean to interrupt, but we have that book in the library system. It's on the way. We don't have it yet. So if you're in Anne Arundel County,
I've been checking the catalog and I didn't see it.
Keep checking. It's coming.
Great.
And then one book you do have in your system is what I started reading this week, actually, is The Lady from the Black Lagoon, Hollywood Monsters and the Lost Legacy of Millicent Patrick by Mallory O'Meara. And this is Millicent Patrick was like an obscure woman from Hollywood who she was an actress at one point. She was an animator for Disney. She worked at the ink and paint department. She animated Dumbo, like scenes of Dumbo and Fantasia. But what she's most known for is actually being the designer of the creature from The Creature of the Black Lagoon. And what's interesting about her is that she was getting some publicity at the time, but the man who hired her, Bud Westmore, who was one of the Westmore family, like the family of makeup artists who were very, very well established in Hollywood at the time and had wielded a lot of power. He did not like how much attention she was getting, and he fired her. So he ended up getting credit. And this author is a film producer, and she was really interested about this, about why she didn't get the credit, learning more about her. So the book is part biography on Millicent Patrick, but it's also, we follow the author's journey researching. There's a feminist angle in exploring how women who were working in Hollywood were treated, how they were credited, and the struggle they've had over the years, and putting that into context today. And also throughout the book, like the author pauses and stops and gives you a little bit of context. Like there's some information about the Westmore family. Millicent Patrick's father was one of the architects on William Randolph Hearst's San Simeon, the Hearst Castle. So there's information about that. So it has so many elements. It's very well written. The voice of the author really comes through. You got the biography of a really interesting woman who very talented, but also very flawed. And then these pockets of information about Hollywood history, and then the feminist angle. Oh my God, it's got everything. And this cover is amazing. You can see there's Millicent Patrick with her sketch pad, and then the arm of the Creature from the Black Lagoon. And the Creature from the Black Lagoon is like one of the most iconic monsters in film history. And the movie inspired The Shape of Things, which is, like the Guillermo del Toro's amazing, Oscar-winning film. So yeah, she should be more well known. So I'm just really fascinated with this book, like devouring it. It's really good. And just really quickly, just a couple books that I'm going to read for this challenge is one I got recently, Elizabeth and Monty, The Untold Story of Their Intimate Friendship by Charles Casillo. And I'm really interested. I've read Scott Iman's book about Henry Fonda and Jimmy Stewart and their friendship. So I'm really interested to read another book about a Hollywood friendship. And they had a really amazing bond, and they're two very interesting. Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift are two just very interesting figures in film history. So I'm really curious to see how this one is. I believe this one is in your system, so you guys can
on order. Yeah.
And then the next one is Mark Harris. This is like, I hate when the book covers are white because then they get really scuffed very easily, but hope you can see this one. This is Mike Nichols, A Life by Mark Harris. Mark Harris is an amazing author. Last time I was with you guys, I think I mentioned this book, Five Came Back, which he wrote, which is about 5 Hollywood directors who went off to World War II and their experience there. This is amazing. This is in your system. It's really amazing book. So I really wanted to read something else by Mark Harris. And I don't know too much about Mike Nichols, but I did watch a documentary about Elaine May and Mike Nichols at the TCM Film Festival that happened recently. And I was really interested about his comedy career and how he transitioned to becoming a film director. And I've read quite a bit about The Graduate, which he directed. So I think this will be really great to kind of explore more about him. And it comes from a really talented author. So I'm sure I'll like this one. Those are the 6 books.
Wow, that's great.
Oh,
Raquel,
actually, can I mention one more?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
Absolutely.
I have a Zoom background for it.
Oh yeah.
One
Oh,
of
I
my
love
favorite
that one.
authors, Christina Rice, has this book, Mean, Moody, Magnificent, Jane Russell and the Marketing of a Hollywood Legend, about Jane Russell, the actress who she passed away several years ago, but her 100th anniversary is coming up next month. So that's when this publishes. So I read Christina Rice's book about Anne Dvorak. It's like the #1 book I recommend to everybody. So I'm just so excited to read another book by her. And she's a really passionate like researcher. She works as a librarian out in Los Angeles, and she's just a really great writer. So just really excited about this one.
I am too. That Anne Dvorak book, which you've got behind you there, that I read that book. I guess it was last year. That is one of the best written, best researched books I have ever read.
Yes.
That is tremendous. And if you don't know much about Anne Dvorak, she is a fascinating character who, I don't want to tell you too much about it, but it's like she never really got her due. And maybe there's a reason why she never got her due. That's a tremendous book, so I can't wait for this Jane Russell book. Jane Russell's one of these actors that you've heard so many stories about, especially in relation to Howard Hughes. So yep. I'm so eager to get this book from somebody who I know has spent the time in the research on this subject. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that one. That one we have on order as well.
Yay! Well, that was it. That was the last one.
Okay.
Well, Raquel, but one more thing.
Oh yeah. I want to open
books.
it. Pretty long. I want to get into questions from everybody in the audience, because I know there's going to be some great questions. But one of the things that our audience may not be aware of is that you keep track of all of the upcoming movie books on your blog. Mm-hmm. And these, I mean, this isn't just 3 or 4 books every time Raquel posts, but it's dozens of books. And these are just, I salivate like every time you post one of these, because I'm like, I want that. I'm going to get the library to buy that. I'm going to get the library to buy that. So can you tell us a little bit about that, the lists of books that you have on your site?
So that takes me a good 2 to 3 weeks to actually dig. I dig through publisher catalogs, mostly through Edelweiss, which is an industry database of publisher catalogs. So I go through a season and I go through hundreds of publisher catalogs looking for books. And then I scour for smaller books on like Amazon. And then I try to gather as many interesting books as I can find. I stopped doing everything because it could be 40, 50 books per roundup. So I try to limit it to things that are interesting. And also some scholarly books can cost upwards to a couple $100. So I try to leave those out unless they're more accessible. But it runs the gamut. Like, recently there's the couple books I mentioned, like the Cicely Tyson book and the Mike Nichols book, but there's also like a new coffee table book about musicals. There's a scholarly book about Josephine Baker. I think there's like a kind of more obscure title about Marlon Brando. Ruta Lee has a new autobiography by a publisher I've never heard of. It's just a very, very tiny publisher, but she has a new memoir and she's absolutely fascinating. So it runs the gamut from small to big publishers. I have some publishers there too that are like university presses. So it really runs the gamut. And I also include like coffee table books, and so scholarly books or coffee table books. So it runs like all different things. But yeah, it takes a good 2 to 3 weeks to come up with that list. So I'm always happy when people like like the list and give me their feedback, because then I know that like all the work that I put into it was worth it. And I usually post those 2 to 3 times a year.
So if you ever are on Raquel's website, which you should be, and look at those lists and see all those great books and think, wow, I really would like to read that. You can also check and see if the library is getting it or if we're going to get it. And if it looks like we aren't buying that, you can put a request in. And like Raquel says, some of these books are really pricey. So for a public library, they may not be able to get all of them, but it doesn't hurt to put a request in. You know, we might get it. Who knows? So.
And a lot of them are readily available. So you'll find quite a lot. And I have 16 different roundups. So there's a lot of options.
All right. Well, Raquel, let's get into some questions from some of the audience members and see what we got. Darnice, do we have anybody that's chomping at the bit with a question?
No, we actually don't have anything in the chat yet. We did have a couple comments from Susan and her love of Christopher Plummer. But if anybody wants to ask Raquel a question or get some ideas about a book they like, you can raise your hand or put in the chat that you'd like to speak. Either one.
Don't be shy.
Don't be shy. We'd love it. Crickets, really?
Wow, we got some really shy people.
Okay, there we go, Bill. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know there are many books out about John Ford, but I'm wondering if there's like a really iconic book that you can recommend on the life and films of John Ford.
Scott Eyman published one a few years ago, and it's very robust. I've only like skimmed it. I haven't read the whole thing, but the one that's actually probably the most well-known is Peter Bogdanovich's book. I'm not sure if it's in print, but he met John Ford and sat with him and interviewed him at length. And Peter Bogdanovich is like one of the like original film historians. He, especially in the 60s and 70s, he interviewed a lot of directors and really wanted to make sure that their stories were captured. And he wrote a lot of books. And I think he also has a documentary about John Ford too. So I would either look up the Scott Eyman book on John Ford or the original Peter Bogdanovich one.
Yeah, Raquel, I was going to mention too that, and I think Jan has already beat me to the punch in the chat, that this book, Searching for John Ford, I have not read all of it because it's a brick. It is huge. It is over 800 pages. But I have referred to it a few times about the chapters on the movies that I have recently seen by John Ford. So just from that, I can recommend this as well as the ones Raquel mentioned.
Here's the Scott Eyman one. It's called Print the Legend.
Yeah.
Get me. So we've got a question in the chat from Brent. This is great info. How do you determine if a biography is trustworthy? For instance, Karina Longworth disagreed with a few conclusions from the 1,000-page Stanwyck book, so maybe not want to read it. So how do you decide?
So I take them with a grain of salt, because pretty much every nonfiction book will have some bias. Some have more than others. I try to look at sources. And for example, there was a book I read about Maureen O'Hara, and Maureen O'Hara was alive at the time, but the biography had no interviews with her. But it mentioned it had a lot of quotes from Maureen O'Hara's memoir. And I was like, why don't I just read Maureen O'Hara's memoir? Like, I don't, I mean, I don't know if this author couldn't get access to Maureen O'Hara. That's very possible. Maybe she wasn't available for interview or not interested. But that's something too, like, did they get access to the actual subject? Who did they talk to? Like, there's a biography on Spencer Tracy, and the author relies a lot on Spencer Tracy's daughter. Is there going to be bias because they have access to the family, and the family will be reading this? And are they going to tone down the book a little bit because they don't want to upset the family? However, if you have access to the family, you might have, access to private letters and, maybe scrapbooks, maybe lots of like information that you might not be able to find at the research library. So yeah, it goes different ways. And also, like, I would more rely on a biography than a memoir. A memoir is going to be biased because it's from the actual subject themselves. Like, Debbie Reynolds has had two, I want to say two memoirs, not three memoirs, two memoirs. I read the sequel. That is very biased. She had an agenda when she was writing this. And I mean, that's her prerogative if she really wanted to get some information out there. And she spends a lot of the book defending herself. And if that's what she wants to do, absolutely go for it. But you got to know that as a reader that, okay, there's an agenda with this book. So yeah, you have to see the sources. I like to read the acknowledgments, and I like to see where they got their information. I think a good source is if they thank Ned Comstock, who is a research librarian out, I forget which school, University of California, University of Southern California. I forget which school it is, but he's credited a lot, and he is one of the top research librarians about classic film history. So if he's acknowledged there, usually that's a good sign that they got a lot of like primary sources. Karina Longworth's book about Howard Hughes, she got access to Howard Hughes's archive in Texas. So that's a good sign that there's a lot of like primary sources available there. So sometimes I do take a peek at the acknowledgements and see who they worked with, because usually they thank them there.
You mentioned
Raquel,
that last
yeah.
week. I'm sorry. Or the last time we met, about Tony Curtis's biography.
Yes,
And yeah, there was very much a large bias in that.
There's quite a bias. I mean, there's a bias in Christopher Plummer's memoir and Michael Caine's. But like you could tell, like Christopher Plummer is telling really fun stories. So Michael Caine's like giving very like straightforward advice. So you can kind of tell there's a difference with those. Like I would more believe Michael Caine than Christopher Plummer. Yeah.
That's very funny.
I know that's human nature. Like, sometimes we cover up things or we don't tell whole truths, and yeah.
Donna mentioned that, and I found it too, that Ned was with USC and he retired last year. Yeah. Okay. So, Andy, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, Raquel, I wondered if you could address, like, a lot of times I'll find somebody that I want to read about, and I'll find something that says the unauthorized biography. I mean, does that mean we should just run away from that? Or possibly does it mean that the star or the star's family did not give permission for that book? Are those worth picking up, or does it vary?
It depends. Like, you might want to stay away from like maybe someone like Kitty Kelly who wrote about Frank Sinatra and he was not very happy about it. That was unauthorized. I'm trying to think of, there's another author who really, takes poetic license with his subjects, and I try to avoid his books, and I'm trying to remember his name. But like, yeah, with unauthorized, it depends though, like what are their sources? That's why I like to look at the acknowledgement section and see, did they work with research librarians? Did they work with archives? Did they work with the academy? Did they work with the unauthorized, they want to work with the family, but did they work with primary sources? Oh, and the author, now I remember, Darwin Porter, he wrote a lot of unauthorized books and they're very questionable. if he has a new book, I usually don't put it on my my roundup because he takes a lot of poetic license with books, but some people like to read that and maybe imagine another like perspective. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. So we need to read some reviews.
Darnies, you agree with me, right?
So do read a few reviews, do a little research, and find out a little bit more about the writer in those cases. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like unauthorized, when they say that, it's a red flag, because it's usually like the publisher trying to not be sued for libel. Like because publishers have to protect themselves, because there's a lot of suits about, there's one author who tried to write about Gene Kelly, and Gene Kelly's widow and the author got into a huge battle, but then these other two authors also wrote about Kelly. So like it depends on, do you have access to the family? Do you have permission from the family? Do you have permission from the author? And if you don't, like, can you get away with it saying unauthorized and not get in trouble? So I don't know. Publishing's interesting.
It is.
And I just for context, I actually work in publishing. I've worked in the book industry since 1998. I'm dating myself.
That's awesome.
Right.
Okay, so we got a couple of more questions in the chat now. People started feeling good. Martha wants to know, did you happen to read All the Stars in the Heavens by Adriana Trigiani? Never say your name right. And if so, did you like it? Our book club at work had read a lot of heavy books and asked for something lighter. I picked it because I liked it, but it didn't go over well. So your thoughts of, if you read fictional stories of actors and movie making, how did you feel about that one?
I have not read that one. I actually haven't heard of it. I have to look this one up. What is it about?
Martha, you want to get on and share?
I'm looking it up right now.
Just you're muted.
Here we go.
There you go.
It's a fictionalized story of the making of The Call of the Wild. Clark Gable had a romance, I guess, with what was her name now? I'm blanking on her name, the actress, Loretta Young. And they mentioned
is it imagining like their the child that they had together and like the circumstances of like their secret relationship, that kind of thing?
Right, and they talk about David Niven and a bunch of other stars. I mean, she's a real kind of chick lit kind of author, but this was a different thing for her. But she did a lot of research for it. I thought the book club would like it, but I learned differently.
Oh no. Well, I have to check that out. I haven't read it. I don't actually read too much fiction just because I don't necessarily know which direction it will go. I worry that it maybe takes too much poetic license with the era. One I do recommend that unfortunately is not in your system, but a fiction book that's really fun is Missing Reels by Farron Smith Nemi. And this is about this woman in New York City who discovers that she lives near a silent movie star, and there's like a whole mystery involved. It's very well written. And Farron Smith Nemi is a classic film blogger and a film critic.
Thanks, Martha.
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
so next question is from Chris. Oops, no, here we go. It's from Brett. Sometimes there's only one book about a movie or person that I love and it's poorly written. Can you relate to this? And do you go on reading the book anyway?
Good question.
Yeah. I can't think of a specific instance, but like just in my personal experience, I do a lot of research for articles for TCM, and I try not to depend on one source because a lot of sources can be biased. So I do digging, and sometimes when I read a biography and it's the only thing I have access on and I suspect that something's kind of off, I'll do some digging outside. Just an example, it's not book related, but I recently wrote a a piece on the Otto Preminger movie, Tell Me That You Love Me, Junie Moon, which stars Liza Minnelli. And there's something really interesting that happened. There's a Liza Minnelli law in Massachusetts where if you're a filmmaker, you have to get permission from the cemetery owner if you want to film a scene in a cemetery. And I can only find one source that said that this was an actual law. And so I doubted it, because what happened is in the movie, they filmed Liza Minnelli undressing in a cemetery. And somebody who like a widow whose husband was also buried in that general area that they filmed was horrified and took both the actress and the director to court. So, and I couldn't find any sources. So actually, Christina Rice, the author of the Anne Dvorak and the Jane Russell books, she's a research librarian. She gave me a tip to ask a law librarian, which I didn't know was a thing that you could do, is actually ask a law librarian. And I emailed a law librarian in Massachusetts, and she told me, yeah, here's the actual law that was enacted in 1971 that says you have to get permission from a cemetery owner in order to film a movie scene. And actually Otto Preminger got cleared because he actually did get permission to film there. But hey, that's something like I didn't necessarily, I was like, is that really a thing? Liza Minnelli law? Like, I'm not really sure. There's just one source. So I wanted to find a backup source. So yeah, if you read something, you're kind of like, you're suspicious about it, try to see if somebody else has also backed that information with, you know, their research.
Good.
Don't just depend on IMDb and Wikipedia.
Please don't. Please don't. Please don't.
Sources are important.
We had a couple of things in the chat, and then I see your hand, Jen. So Christina wants to know, on average, how many pages do you read or listen to per week?
It depends how busy I am, because I do a lot of research on movies, and sometimes I spend a lot of time just reading, you know, like research articles, or sometimes I like the Tony Curtis memoir. I ended up reading 3 times for a research article, but I didn't read it all the way through. I read it in bits and bobs. But I do try to read. I'm a slow reader, so 100 pages a day is a good average for me. And like, but sometimes I can read a whole book in one sitting, but that's pretty rare. So yeah, I try to aim for 100 pages a day if I can.
Awesome. Okay, so excuse me. Gabrielle says, we've talked up biographies, but do you have any recommendations for books on movies?
Yeah, so some that I had mentioned earlier, like I recommend, if you can find anything by Mark A. Vieira, he has some really great coffee table style books. He has a book on film noir. He has a book on pre-codes, which is absolutely amazing. I have that somewhere here. Oh, here, I can't find it. But this one is about Cecil B. DeMille. He's a really great author to look up. I really like the Turner Classic Movie books. They have a lot. They, for example, Richard Berrios is an expert on musicals, and he wrote this book about West Side Story. He's really amazing. He has 2 scholarly books about the early history of musicals. And then this is just a really fun history with has lots of images about West Side Story for the anniversary. It kind of hints to the new adaptation that's coming out. But they have a lot of great ones. And I know you guys have a lot in your system. Like there's this one here, which is specifically about the history of horror movies, called Fright Favorites by David J. Scull. And then if you could read anything by Sloane DeForest, she's one of my favorite authors. She has this wonderful book about 50 must-see sci-fi movies. This one converted me over to science fiction, and I was kind of skeptical about science fiction because I'm more drawn to films that have some sort of realism, but like she sold me on science fiction. So I just started watching more, and this was really a great primer, and also really fun for somebody who loves science fiction too. So it's got both angles. And then she has this really great book too called Dynamic Dames, about 50 different leading actresses from film history from like the 20s until today. And this is really, really well done. So if you want books about just movies in general and not necessarily biographies, I would look up the TCM imprint that they have with Running Press. They have some really great movie books, and I wouldn't call them like, they're lighter reads because they have a lot of images in them, but they're written by really, really amazing film historians and experts. So you're really getting a really great background on whatever the subject is.
Okay, so one more. Oh no, Jen, you're next. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. May I make just a few brief recommendations?
Yes.
Sure.
Oh, and he's got his own.
The Big Goodbye. It's the history of the film Chinatown, which is going to be the subject, I think, of one of Andy's summer films. Marvelous book.
Oh, who's the author?
Are we doing dueling books? Who's the author?
Sam Wasson, Wasson.
Oh, great. I love that movie.
Yes. Our next book is by someone who's here tonight, Phantom Lady. If you are a Hitchcock fan,
All right.
This is actually Andy's version.
I love this
Yes.
book. I love this book so much.
it is a fantastic.
And you guys had her on, right?
I have been a
Christina Lynn?
home
Yeah.
fan for
She's here tonight.
She's on right now.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I recommend this book all the
Yes,
time. It's just
please.
amazing.
Thanks, guys.
If you like
Hi.
Hitchcock, please read this. It's a marvelous book.
Yes,
The next
it's
book.
really great.
The next book is very interesting. It is a collection of newspaper advertisements for
Oh.
noir movies. It is a wonderful book from a visual point of view. And then
Andy's
finally,
getting his copy too, I think.
this is simply one of the
Ah,
Andy. Yeah. Yes.
Very good.
And this
Which
My
one is
last
that?
one
oh
was
yeah,
just-
I remember. Andy, you review. Did you review that one last year?
I did. Yes.
Yes, I remember. I have that on my wish
Marvelous.
list.
Yes. Anyone who wants to read about the screenwriters from the 1930s, please read this book. It's a marvelous book. It's got an introduction by Eddie Muller. You will learn stories that will just amaze you.
That's something I want to explore more, is books about screenwriters.
Hmm.
Jan, I think we must have been separated at birth, because we love the same books. We have the same books. We love the same movies. I'm so glad you picked that. And I just wanted to have a quick shout out to the writer of this book is David Koenig, I think is how he pronounces it. We're Twitter friends, and he's working on another book like this. And just like Jan says, these are all newspaper ads from these movies, these film noir
Oh.
movies. I could just get lost in this, and I do get lost in this book frequently.
I
Just
love
that.
finding those on the New York Times, like their time machine. I love seeing those when I'm
Mhm.
trying to do some research, and I usually stop on those because to read a book just about that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, those are fun. So sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
Well,
No,
that's
that's fine.
great. Thank you for the recommendations.
Yeah, excellent, Jan.
I am writing in the chat. Someone asked what the title of that book was, and that was the title. Choir Noirs.
Right.
Cover. Yeah. So a couple of other things popped up while we were talking. Gabriel wants to know, is books on older TV stars and shows allowed for the challenge? I have reasons, they say.
Yeah, you know what? I would count that. It's not necessarily movies, obviously it's television, but I would count that just because television and movies were like, parallel, and they influenced each other. So I would definitely count that.
Awesome.
And the history of television is really fascinating. And like when you get into films of the 1950s, like they're all influenced by competing with television. And in the history of how foreign movies were shown in the United States, also influenced by television, because foreign movies weren't restricted by the Hays Code, which had guidelines for what could and could not be shown in a movie. So foreign films were competing with films which were competing with television. So there's lots of parallels. So I would encourage that.
Perfect.
Great.
So along the same lines, Nikki wants, no, Susan wants to know, would a bio of Bob Fosse also fit the challenge?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
I actually have, hold on, let's see if I can find it. I have a book I read for the challenge about Charles Walters, who was a director and a choreographer. And this was really fascinating. So I would recommend going beyond just, your typical like actor and actress, and just try to find somebody who's interesting. And people who worked, maybe later in the 20th century is totally fine. My criteria is loose. I'm just trying to like encourage people to read about film history. So a lot of things count.
Awesome.
Yeah, great.
Okay, well, that was the last question in the chat. Bill, you have a question? Bill B?
Yeah, I thought of a couple more quick things. Number one, would you have a recommendation of what your go-to book would be for film restoration? Anything about that? My second question is, do you yourself pay much attention to film critics? And if so, are there particular ones that you're more impressed by or follow more frequently?
I don't read too much from film critics other than like contemporary film critics who are writing about movies today. Mostly because I also review movies and I get kind of nervous reading about that because I don't necessarily want to like be influenced by other people's thoughts, but like I also like to read about criticism. I do. So many people have recommended getting a Pauline Kael book, so that's on my list to get. I've read like her reviews in bits and bobs, but I've never actually read a book collecting her reviews, so I definitely want to do that. And what was the other question? Sorry, I forgot.
Do you have a go-to book that's about film restoration?
So I really am interested in like the early films, like films from like the 20s and early 30s. The George Eastman Museum has a few books. They have one called The Dawn of Technicolor, which is about the history of Technicolor and in many cases like how like early two-strip Technicolor was restored in some cases, and also in some cases it was lost. And it's also just the history of Technicolor and how that influenced, basically everything that we see in color in some sort of media came back to Technicolor. So I don't know about restoration in particular. I have seen many like little mini documentaries and presentations on it, but books not so much. But I would totally read something about film restoration. But George Eastman Museum, like they have restored a lot of really great older movies. And then the UCLA Television and Film Archive. I love reading about the Vitaphone Project, which also is really interesting to learn about how they helped find and restore old Vitaphone shorts. That's all really fascinating to me. Yeah.
Bill, if I can
Thank
jump in, I just, it's funny you mentioned that because I just listened to a podcast this morning, and I just put it in the chat from someone we all know, probably Eddie Muller, was talking on this podcast about film restoration. And I think this podcast is only like maybe a couple of days old. Yeah, it came out yesterday. So he's talking about like up-to-date, cutting edge stuff that's going on involving film restoration. And we did have Eddie on the program, but that was I guess last year. So some other developments have come up. So that episode is in the chat if anybody wants to check that out. It's only about a half hour long. Highly recommend that.
Great, thanks.
Okay, Darnice, I think you're muted. And Darnice, you're still muted. We didn't get what you
sorry.
said.
Oh, sorry. I was saying that Jan put in the chat another book, Nitrate Won't Wait, a book about film preservation by Anthony Slide. So that's another option.
I mean, there's so many people who are experts on, the restoration and preservation of older movies, and I'm just in awe because that's not an area of expertise I have, but I just really like to listen to experts talk about it.
Christina just put one in the chat too. Carolyn Fricks, Saving Cinema. Thanks, Christina.
Oh, great. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, so lots of great books and great recommendations. Anybody else have a question for Raquel before probably going to wrap it up here in just a few minutes? Now's your chance. Okay, well, Raquel, I really, really want to thank you for joining us again tonight. I think if it's possible, we probably had more fight than we had the last time you were on, and we had a ball that time.
Yeah,
So this is so great. And we always close with recommendations on this program, and you've given us a lot of great book recommendations, but are
Uh-oh. Am I frozen? I'm frozen. Am I frozen or is Andy?
I think Andy's frozen.
Oh, there we go.
You're
back now.
Okay. I was just going to say, so many great book recommendations that you've given us, and we so appreciate that. Are there any movie recommendations you could give us? Something you've seen lately that you want to share?
Yes. So I recently attended the TCM Classic Film Festival, which was virtual this year, and they had a restoration of the early horror movie Dr. X, which was directed by Michael Curtiz, and it's a great restoration. The presentation had an intro by Alan K. Rode, who's a film historian, also biographer of Michael Curtiz. That was a really fun early horror movie, kind of one of those like mad scientist movies. It was in 2-strip Technicolor, so there's lots of really cool visual elements. It has Fay Ray, it's just like it was a really fun early horror film. And recently I've been really trying to watch like a lot more like foreign films. Like a recent one that I wrote something on is Run Lola Run, which is a more recent film from 1998. It's a great like German time loop thriller about this woman who has to secure 10,000 German marks or whatever it was that to save her boyfriend who's about to be attacked by gangsters. So and it explores like 3 different variations of how that heist could have gone. That's really great. And then recently I'm actually part of a Patreon group of really amazing writers and creators, all women who love classic movies. And for that, I recently watched 2 movies about career women from the 1930s. One is Ex-Lady from 1933, which is a wonderful pre-code starring Betty Davis. And she's like this talented illustrator who's, living in sin with her boyfriend, and she refuses to marry, and she wants to keep her career and like it, but it's the early 30s, so she can only go so far. But it's really a fascinating pre-code that kind of explores like what working women were dealing with at the time. And then there's another film that came later that's kind of similar called The First 100 Years from 1938, which stars Virginia Bruce and Robert Montgomery. And it's a similar thing, but it's a married couple. and she's the woman's a very successful talent agent in New York City, but he wants to move to New Bedford, Massachusetts to build ships. So there's like that dynamic. I just thought that was really fascinating to watch a couple movies that were kind of on the same subject, but in two different parts of the same decade, because pre-code films and films from the late 30s are different. So those are some that I watched recently.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
That is awesome. Yeah, a lot of agreement about Dr. X in the chat. And
Yeah.
Jan also mentioned that X Lady is also very good. It's a quickie remake of the Stanwyck's Illicit.
That's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
They did a lot of remakes back then. Like sometimes
Yeah.
a remake would show up just a couple years later.
Yeah.
Debbie wants to know what's the name of that Patreon group that you are a part of.
It's got a long name, so I'm just gonna refer to it by its shorter name, Classic Film Collective. And I can drop a link if you want in the chat.
Yeah, if you don't
Yeah, if
mind.
you can, that'd be
I
great.
see that Nikki is in this group. She's also a writer for that group.
Oh, great.
So we have somebody
she's got it
here
there.
from that collective.
Super. Thank you, Nikki.
Okay, that's awesome.
All right.
Okay, I'm dropping the link right now.
Okay. Super.
Yeah, she did too.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, while everybody is saving those links, wow, there's so much great stuff we talked about tonight. First of all, I want to thank Raquel for joining us again. And this may not be the last time we want to have you on the program. So don't go anywhere, okay? So thank you again, Raquel, and thank everybody for joining us tonight. This is a great turnout, and so many books. If you're like me, I wrote down like so many titles that I want to check out. And just to let you know, I'm not going to disclose any titles, but I do have several books that I have chosen for my summer reading
You
challenge.
tease, I want to know what those are.
You'll find out. Check my blog out. Maybe my YouTube channel. It may show up there. So
Shameless
Oh,
plug.
can I just do a shout out to my own YouTube channel? I have
yes, absolutely.
a full tour of all of my books in my collection. It's a very long
Awesome.
video. But you want to know everything I own, except for like maybe a few of the new ones I talked about today.
Oh,
I have a tour.
Can you put that in the chat for us?
Yes.
Or
I've got it.
you got okay. Darnese
Yeah,
has
I
it.
was just about to put in because we usually ask where people can find you
Oh, okay.
online. And so I know that you are on Twitter and Facebook. So I was trying to grab those too, but
Yeah.
Thank
so
you.
you can just
yeah.
say what your
Okay.
names
Oh,
are.
did you get Darnese? Did you get her Twitter information?
Yeah, so I'm getting ready to do her Twitter,
Okay,
but I
great,
don't
great,
have
great.
the others.
Okay. So yeah, we can Raquel, I know we can find you on Twitter. We can find you on your blog, your YouTube channel. Where else can we find you?
Oh, let me I think the YouTube you have is another one.
Oh, sorry.
I will drop in the URL
Yeah,
really
do the right
quickly.
one maybe.
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
not
I write for Turner Classic Movies on their website and on their Tumblr blog, so you can find me there. I also write for DVD Netflix, and I have my blog about old movies out of the past, and I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I'm pretty much everywhere.
All right. Well, good. We want lots of ways to be in touch with you. So that's wonderful news. All right. Well, thank you again, everybody. This has been just a real treat to have Raquel with us and to have all of you here with us. It's really, really wonderful. So I hope we will see many of you in Raquel's reading challenge. And if you just want to do your own reading challenge, that's great too. But the main thing is to read some great books about movies and have a great time. Share what you've read with other people, and let's get more people involved. So this is wonderful. All right. Well, don't forget to join us. The next time we'll meet together is on Friday, June the 4th for our discussion of After the Storm. So everybody take care. Watch out for those cicadas. Watch some great movies and read some great movie books. Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye. Thanks. Hope to see you again.